The marble floors of Maxwell Industries headquarters gleamed as Richard Maxwell walked through the lobby. Everyone knew him as the ruthless CEO who had turned his father's small company into a billion-dollar empire. At 45, Richard had everything money could buy, but today he wanted something else. Revenge. "Send the invitation to this address," Richard told his assistant, handing her a golden envelope. A smirk played on his face as he thought about Jasmine Washington, the woman who had broken his heart 20 years ago. Lisa, his assistant, looked at the envelope with confusion. "Sir, isn't this your ex-girlfriend from college? The one you told? Feign never to mention. Times change, Lisa. I want her at my wedding. Make sure she gets the invitation personally delivered." Richard loosened his Italian silk tie as he walked into his office. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Chicago skyline. He now practically owned. He sat in his leather chair and picked up a framed photo from his desk, him and Victoria, his soon-to-be wife, at their engagement party. Victoria came from old money, just like him. She was perfect for his image, perfect for his social circle, perfect for everything he had built. But 20 years ago, things were different. Richard had been a young business student, madly in love with Jasmine Washington, a scholarship student studying art. They were from different worlds. He was from the wealthy North Shore. She was from the South Side. His family hated that. He was dating a black girl from the wrong side of town, but Richard didn't care. He had been ready to give up everything for her, until she left him. "Mr. Maxwell, your fiancé is here," Lisa's voice came through the intercom. Victoria swept into the office, her designer heels clicking against the floor. She was everything Jasmine wasn't: blonde, sophisticated, and most importantly, from their social circle. "Darling, the wedding planner needs final approval on the guest list." Richard pulled her close and kissed her cheek. "I just added one more name, an old friend from college." "Oh? Anyone I know?" "No, but everyone will know her soon enough." Richard couldn't help but smile, thinking about his plan. He had spent years building his empire, becoming one of Chicago's most powerful men. Now he wanted Jasmine to see exactly what she had given up. Across town, in a modest art gallery in the heart of Chicago's arts district, Jasmine Washington was teaching a group of children about colors and creativity. At 43, she had built a life she was proud of. Her gallery wasn't huge, but it was respected in the community, and her art programs for underprivileged kids were making a real difference. "Miss Washington, someone left this for you," her assistant Marcus called, out holding a golden envelope. Jasmine opened it and felt her heart stop. It was an invitation to Richard Maxwell's wedding. The same Richard who had once promised to love her forever. The same Richard whose family had tried to buy her off to leave him. The same Richard she had left to protect him from losing everything. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, noticing her hands shaking. "I'm fine," she said. But she wasn't. The invitation brought back memories she had buried deep. Their secret meetings in the university library, the plans they had made, the dreams they had shared, and the threat his father had made that forced her to walk away. That evening, Jasmine sat in her small apartment above the gallery, staring at the invitation. She knew why Richard had sent it: to show off, to prove he had succeeded without. Hurstum dies, the boy she had loved, had turned into exactly what his father had wanted: cold, calculating, and cruel. Her phone rang, displaying a number she hadn't seen in years. "Hello?" "Jasmine, it's James Chen." Her heart skipped a beat. James Chen, Richard's former best friend, and now his biggest business rival. The man who had tried to warn her about Richard's family all those years ago. "James, how did you—" "I heard Richard invited you to his wedding. We need to talk." Jasmine looked at the invitation again. "Yes, I think we do." As she hung up the phone, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of defiance. Richard wanted to humiliate her? Well, two could play at that game. She picked up her phone again and called James back. "Let's meet tomorrow," she said. "I have an idea." In his penthouse office, Richard was looking at old photos on his computer. Pictures of him and Jasmine from college. Pictures he should have deleted years ago but couldn't bring himself to. His finger traced her smile on the screen. "Sir?" Lisa interrupted through the intercom. The invitation was delivered. Richard closed the photos and smiled. "Perfect. Everything's going according to plan." But plans have a way of backfiring, and Richard Maxwell was about to learn that some games are dangerous to play. As the Chicago night settled over the city, 3 people lay awake. A bitter millionaire plotting revenge, an artist remembering old wounds, and a businessman seeing an opportunity to right old wrongs. The stage was set for a wedding that would shake Chicago's high society to its core. And somewhere in the city, a golden invitation sat on a table, its elegant script promising a celebration of love, but holding the seeds of something far more explosive. The next morning, Jasmine walked into the luxurious lobby of the Four Seasons. Her simple black dress felt out of place among the designer outfits of the other guests, but she held her head high. 20 years ago, she would have felt intimidated. Not anymore. James Chen was waiting for her at a corner table in the restaurant. At 45, he had aged well, his success visible in his confident posture and expensive suit. He stood up when he saw her, and his warm smile brought back memories of easier times. "You haven't changed a bit," James said, pulling out a chair for her. "And you're still a terrible liar," Jasmine laughed, but her eyes were studying him carefully. "Why did you really call me James?" A waiter brought them coffee and James waited until they were alone again. "Richard's been trying to take over my company for the past year. He's already bought out 3 of my board members." "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything." James leaned forward. "You're the only person who ever had real power over him. The only one who could make him lose control." Jasmine stirred her coffee, memories flooding back. That was a long time ago. We were different people then, were we? James pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. "Richard's been destroying every business that won't sell to him. He's not just ruthless, he's cruel. The boy we knew in college, he's gone." Jasmine remembered that boy. The Richard who used to bring her coffee during her late-night study sessions, who dreamed of using his family's money to help people. His father finally got what he wanted. "You never told me why you really left him," James said softly. Jasmine's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "His father came to see me the night before I left. Said he would make sure Richard lost everything, his inheritance, his future in the company, everything, if I stayed with him. He had proof that Richard had been helping me pay for my mother's medical bills with company money." "What?" James's shock was genuine. "Richard never told me about your mother. She was dying. We couldn't afford the treatments. Richard found a way to classify the payments as business expenses." Jasmine blinked back tears. "If it had come out, he would have been arrested for fraud. His father knew that. He gave me a choice: leave Richard or watch him go to prison." James sat back, understanding dawning on his face. "So you left to protect him, and now he's invited you to his wedding to hurt you." Karma's funny that way. Jasmine tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Come to the wedding with me," James said suddenly. "What?" "Think about it. Richard invited you to show off, to prove he's better off without you. Instead, show up on the arm of his biggest business rival. Show him you're not the same girl he can hurt anymore." Jasmine started to shake her head, but James wasn't finished. "And while we're there, we can talk to some of his investors. People who aren't happy with how cruel he's become. People who might be interested in knowing there's an alternative. You want to use me to help take down his company? I want to stop him before he destroys more lives." James reached across the table and took her hand. "And I want to help you show him he didn't break you." Across town, Victoria was having her final wedding dress fitting at the most exclusive bridal salon in Chicago. Her mother and 3 bridesmaids were fawning over the designer gown, but Victoria's mind was elsewhere. "Darling, you seem distracted," her mother said, adjusting the veil. Richard added someone to the guest list, an ex-girlfriend from college. Her mother's perfectly maintained eyebrows shot up. "The black girl, Jasmine something?" Victoria spun around. "You know about her." "Everyone in our circle knows that story, dear. Richard's little rebellion before he came to his senses. His father had to step in and end it." Victoria stared at her, reflection in the mirror. The dress cost more than most people's cars, but suddenly it felt suffocating. Why would he invite her to our wedding? To show off, of course. Her mother smiled coldly. To prove he made the right choice. But Victoria wasn't so sure. She had seen Richard looking at old photos late at night when he thought she was sleeping. She had heard him say Jasmine's name in his sleep more than once. Back at his office, Richard was in a board meeting when his assistant slipped him a note. He read it and his face darkened. "Meeting adjourned," he snapped, waiting until everyone left before reading the note again. "Sir," Lisa said hesitantly, "our sources confirm that Miss Washington had breakfast with James Chen this morning at the Four Seasons." Richard crumpled the note in his fist. James Chen, his former best friend, now his biggest rival. The man who had tried to warn Jasmine about Richard's family all those years ago. "Get me everything you can find about Jasmine's life for the past 20 years, he ordered. "Everything? Sir, is that really necessary?" Richard turned to the window, his reflection showing a face twisted with emotion. "She left me without a word, Lisa. Let me rot in hell thinking I wasn't good enough. And now she's meeting with James? Oh, this isn't how my revenge was supposed to go." Lisa had worked for Richard long enough to recognize the dangerous glint in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes." Richard picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Dad, we need to talk about Jasmine Washington." In her small apartment that evening, Jasmine looked at her phone. A text from James. "Dinner tomorrow. We need to plan our grand entrance." She thought about Richard, about his father, about all the pain and secrets of the past. Then she thought about the children at her gallery, about the difference she had made in their lives despite everything. "Yes," she texted back. "It's time." The Chicago skyline glittered outside her window, the same view she had painted so many times over the years. But tonight it looked different. Tonight it looked like a battlefield, and in 3 different parts of the city, 3 people made decisions that would change everything. Richard called in old favors to dig up dirt on Jasmine. James started making calls to Richard's unhappy investors. And Jasmine opened her closet and pulled out a small box she had kept hidden for 20 years. Inside was a letter she had never sent, explaining everything to Richard. And underneath it, a USB drive containing proof of what his father had really done all those years ago. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and the real drama was just beginning. Victoria sat in her luxury spa robe, getting her nails done at Chicago's most exclusive salon. But her perfect afternoon was about to be ruined. Her best friend Susan burst in, waving her phone like it held breaking news. "Have you seen this?" Susan shoved the phone in Victoria's face. On the screen was a photo of Jasmine and James Chen having dinner at an upscale restaurant. Victoria's stomach dropped. The woman in the photo was beautiful, with smooth dark skin and natural hair styled elegantly. She carried herself with grace that no amount of money could buy. This was Richard's ex-girlfriend. "They've been seen together 3 times this week," Susan said, scrolling through more photos. "Everyone's talking about it. James Chen is Richard's biggest business rival, and now he's dating Richard's ex." Victoria pulled her hands away from the manicurist. "Get me my phone." She dialed Richard's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He had been distant lately, spending more and more time at the office. Now she knew why. Meanwhile, across town, Richard was sitting in his father's study. The room hadn't changed in 20 years. Same leather chairs, same oak desk, same smell of expensive cigars, and same cold look in Robert Maxwell's eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, son," Robert said, pouring himself a whiskey. "Inviting that girl to your wedding? What were you thinking?" "I wanted her to see what she gave up," Richard growled. "But now she's with James Chen. They're plotting something." Robert took a long sip of his drink. "Perhaps it's time I told you the whole truth about why she left." Richard's head snapped up. "What do you mean? You were young, foolish, using company money to pay for her mother's medical bills. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" The color drained from Richard's face. "How did you—" "I knew everything. Just like I knew she was going to leave you that night." Robert's smile was cold. "Because I made her an offer she couldn't refuse." Richard stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "What did you do?" "What I had to do to protect this family. I gave her a choice, leave you or watch you go to prison for fraud. She chose to protect you." Robert shrugged. She loved you enough to walk away. Isn't that touching? Richard's world spun. 20 years of anger, 20 years of thinking she had abandoned him because he wasn't good enough. All a lie. You destroyed my life, he whispered. I saved your life, Robert corrected. Look at you now, CEO of a billion-dollar company. About to marry into one of the best families in Chicago. You should thank me. Richard stormed out of the house, his mind racing. In his car, he pulled out his phone and stared at the photos his investigators had gathered of Jasmine's life. Photos of her teaching art to underprivileged kids, opening her gallery, winning community service awards. She had built a beautiful life despite everything, despite him. At her gallery, Jasmine was closing up for the night when James arrived, with takeout dinner. Your plan is working, he said, setting up the food on her desk. Richard's been distracted at board meetings, making mistakes. His investors are starting to notice. Jasmine picked at her food. I saw Victoria today, at the grocery store. She pretended not to see me, but I could feel her watching. Are you having second thoughts? No. Jasmine pulled out the USB drive she had shown him earlier that week. But this isn't just about Richard anymore. His father's corruption goes deeper than we thought. James examined the documents on the drive. This is explosive stuff. Financial, fraud, tax evasion, bribes to city officials. How long have you had this? 20 years. I kept it as insurance in case Robert Maxwell ever tried to hurt Richard. I never thought... She trailed off. Never thought what? Never thought I'd use it to hurt Richard myself. The door chimed and they both looked up. Victoria stood there, still in her spa robe, mascara streaked down her face. We need to talk, she said to Jasmine, about Richard. James started to stand, but Jasmine waved him back down. It's okay, we can use my office. The two women walked into the small room filled with paintings. Victoria looked around, her eyes landing on a portrait that made her gasp. It was Richard, 20 years younger, laughing at something off canvas. You still paint him, Victoria said softly. Some wounds never heal. Jasmine sat down. What do you want to know? Did he love you? Really love you? Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Yes, and I loved him. But love isn't always enough. Victoria sank into a chair. He says your name in his sleep. Did you know that? He thinks I don't. Here, but I do. Outside the office, James was making calls. Richard's investors were getting nervous. The wedding drama was affecting stock prices. Everything was falling into place. But at Maxwell Industries, Richard was putting together pieces of his own. His father's confession had changed everything. He pulled up an old email account he hadn't used in years and started typing, Jasmine, I know the truth. About what my father did. About why you left. We need to talk. His finger hovered over the send button. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Where are you? We need to talk about the wedding. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows through the glass towers. In a small art gallery, two women were sharing painful truths. In a corporate office, a man was questioning everything he had built his life on. And somewhere in between, secrets 20 years old were about to explode into the open. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and nothing would ever be the same. Victoria sat in her car outside Jasmine's gallery for a long time after their conversation. Her perfect world was crumbling, and the worst part was that she couldn't even hate Jasmine. The woman had shown her nothing but kindness, even when talking about the man they both loved. Her phone buzzed, another message from Richard asking where she was. She turned off the phone and started driving, not sure where she was going until she found herself at her mother's house. Victoria? Her mother opened the door in surprise. What's wrong, darling? Everything. Victoria collapsed onto the expensive sofa. Richard's still in love with her, with Jasmine. Her mother's face hardened. Don't be ridiculous. Richard Maxwell knows exactly what he wants, and it's not some art teacher from the wrong side of town. You don't understand. I saw them together in his old photos, the way he looked at her. Victoria wiped her eyes. He's never looked at me like that. Listen to me very carefully. Her mother sat down, taking Victoria's hands. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Half of Chicago's elite will be there. This is not the time for doubts, but what if I'm making a mistake? The only mistake would be throwing away everything we've worked for because of some old photos. Her mother's grip tightened. Remember who you are, a Hamilton. We don't give up what's ours. Meanwhile, James Chen was meeting with his lawyers. The documents from Jasmine's USB drive were spread across the conference table. This is enough to destroy Maxwell Industries, his lawyer said. Tax fraud, embezzlement, bribes. Robert Maxwell could go to prison. And Richard? James asked. Some of these transactions happened after he became CEO. He's not clean either. James thought about Jasmine, about the pain in her eyes when she talked about Richard. Hold off on filing anything. We need to time this perfectly. Across town, Richard sat in his office, staring at the email he still hadn't sent to Jasmine. His father's confession had changed everything, but there was more to the story. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Detective Martinez, I need you to look into something from 20 years ago. My father's dealings with Chicago General Hospital. The detective had been on Richard's payroll for years. The cancer ward payments? Yes. I want to know exactly what happened to Jasmine Washington's mother. It'll take time. You have 24 hours. Richard hung up and opened his desk drawer. Inside was an old sketch Jasmine had done of him in college. He had kept it all these years, hidden away like the feelings he couldn't let go. At her gallery, Jasmine was teaching her evening art class when a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Lisa, Richard's assistant. Miss Washington? Mr. Maxwell. Would like to meet with you. The children looked up from their paintings, curious about the fancy lady in the business suit. I'm in the middle of a class, Jasmine said. He said it's about your mother's hospital records. Jasmine's hand shook, splattering paint on her apron. Marcus, she called to her assistant, can you take over the class? In the car, Lisa was quiet as she drove Jasmine to Maxwell Industries. The building seemed to touch the sky, all glass, and steel and power. He's different when he talks about you, Lisa said suddenly. Softer somehow. Jasmine didn't respond. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, Richard was standing there, looking more uncertain than she had ever seen him. Thank you for coming, he said softly. You found something about my mother. Yes. He led her into his office. My father didn't just threaten to expose the money I used for her treatment. He made sure she was moved to a different hospital, away from the doctors who were helping her. Jasmine felt her knees go weak. What? He wanted to make sure I couldn't keep helping her, even after you left. Richard's voice cracked. Jasmine, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. She sank into a chair, 20 years of grief hitting her all at once. She died alone in a hospital across town. I couldn't even afford to be with her because I had to work. Richard knelt in front of her chair. I just found out my father, he's been controlling everything, everyone for so long, but I'm going to make this right. How? Jasmine looked at him through tears. You can't bring her back. No, but I can make him pay. Richard pulled out a file. I've been gathering evidence, not just about what he did to your mother, but everything. The bribes, the fraud, all of it. James has evidence too, Jasmine admitted. That USB drive I kept all these years? I know. Richard smiled sadly. You were always smarter than me, more prepared. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years between them. Why did you really invite me to your wedding? Jasmine finally asked. Because I'm a fool. Richard stood and walked to the window. I thought I wanted revenge, but seeing you again, learning the truth, I don't know what I want anymore. That's not fair to Victoria. No, it's not. He turned back to her. Just like it wasn't fair what my father did to us. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow through the office windows. In the distance, church bells rang. I should go. Jasmine stood up. My students will be wondering where I am. Wait. Richard caught her hand. Come to dinner tomorrow. Night, you, me, and Victoria. We need to talk about what happens next. Richard, please, no more secrets, no more games, just the truth. As Jasmine left the building, her phone buzzed with a message from James. The lawyers are ready. Say the word, and we can file everything tomorrow. She looked back at the towering building, thinking about Richard's face when he talked about his father's betrayal, about Victoria's tears in the gallery, about 20 years of pain and lies. "Not yet," she texted back. "There's something I need to do first." In his office, Richard finally hit send on the email he had written earlier. Then he called Victoria. "We need to talk," he said, "about everything." The wedding was 10 days away and the truth was finally coming to light. But truth, like love, can be a dangerous thing. And in Chicago's world of power and privilege, dangerous things had a way of getting people hurt. The private dining room at LeBlanc was silent except for the soft clink of silverware. Richard sat at the head of the table, Victoria to his right, Jasmine to his left. Nobody had touched their food. "So," Victoria broke the silence, her voice steady despite her shaking hands, "you two were in love." "Yes," Richard and Jasmine said at the same time, then looked away from each other. "And your father forced you apart?" Victoria turned to Richard. "The same man who's been pushing for our wedding?" Richard nodded. "He threatened to have me arrested for using company money to help Jasmine's mother, but that wasn't all. He made sure her mother couldn't get proper treatment." Victoria gasped. "He let her die?" "He made sure she died alone," Jasmine said quietly. "To punish me for loving his son." The waiter came to refill their water glasses, and they all sat in uncomfortable silence until he left. "I wanted revenge," Richard admitted. "That's why I invited you to the wedding, Jasmine. I was angry, bitter. I thought you had left me because I wasn't good enough." "And now?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "Now I know the truth, and I can't marry you while living a lie." Richard reached for Victoria's hand. "You deserve better than that." Victoria pulled her hand away. "Do you know what this will do to my family? To yours? The wedding is in 9 days. "I know." Richard looked tired, older somehow. "But I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" Victoria's voice rose. "That you don't still love her?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "My mother was right about one thing," she said, grabbing her purse. "The Maxwells destroy everything they touch." She stormed out, leaving Richard and Jasmine alone. "That could have gone better," Richard sighed. "What did you expect?" Jasmine asked. "You just broke her heart in front of the woman you really love." "Do I?" Richard looked at her intently. "Still love you?" Before she could answer, both their phones buzzed. Breaking news alerts. Richard's face went pale as he read the headline. "Maxwell. Industries under federal investigation for fraud." "James," Jasmine whispered. "He must have filed the evidence." "No." Richard showed her his phone. "This came from inside Maxwell Industries. Someone leaked everything to the press." His phone rang. His father. "I have to take this." He stepped away from the table, leaving Jasmine alone with her thoughts. Her phone was flooding with messages from James. "This wasn't me," his text read. "Someone beat us to it." In his father's study, Robert Maxwell was destroying documents when Richard burst in. "You're finished," Richard said coldly. "I found everything, the fraud, the bribes, what you did to Jasmine's mother." "You fool," Robert snarled. "Everything I did was to protect this family, to protect you." "No, everything you did was to control me." "But it's over." Robert pulled out a gun from his desk drawer. "Nothing's over. I built this empire. I won't let you destroy it." "Put the gun down, Dad." Richard's voice was steady. "The FBI is already on their way." "You chose her over your own family?" Robert's hand shook. "That girl from the streets." "I chose the truth." Richard took a step forward. "For the first time in 20 years, I chose the truth." The sound of sirens filled the air. Robert looked at the gun in his hand, then at his son. "I'm sorry," he whispered, before turning the gun on himself. "Dad, no!" Richard lunged forward, but it was too late. At her gallery, Jasmine was pacing when James rushed in. "Have you seen the news?" he asked breathlessly. "Robert Maxwell shot himself. Richard's at the hospital." Jasmine grabbed her keys. "I have to go to him." "Wait." James caught her arm. "Think about what this means. With his father dead and the company under investigation, Richard's vulnerable. We can take everything. Is that all you care about?" Jasmine pulled away. "Power?" Money? What about the people getting hurt? People like you. James's face hardened. Don't tell me you've forgotten how the Maxwells treated you. No, I haven't forgotten. But I'm not like them. I won't destroy someone just because I can. She left James standing in the gallery, surrounded by her paintings, 20 years of pain and love captured on canvas. At Chicago General Hospital, Victoria found Richard sitting alone in the waiting room. I heard about your father, she said softly. I'm sorry. Richard looked up, his eyes red. He was going to shoot me. His own son. Victoria sat next to him, taking his hand. The reporters are outside. They want to know about the wedding. Tell them the truth. Richard squeezed her hand. All of it. Even about Jasmine? Especially about Jasmine. The emergency room doors opened, and Jasmine walked in. She stopped when she saw Richard and Victoria holding hands. I should go, she started to turn. No, Victoria stood up. You should stay, he needs you. She walked away, her heels clicking on the hospital floor, leaving Richard and Jasmine alone again. I never stopped loving you, Richard said quietly. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Jasmine sat down beside him. Your whole world is falling apart. Maybe it needs to. He turned to look at her. Maybe we all need to fall apart before we can become who we're supposed to be. Outside the hospital, reporters clamored for a story. Inside, two people who had loved and lost and found each other again sat in silence, holding hands as the night grew deeper. The wedding was 8 days away, but sometimes the end of one dream is the beginning of another. And sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, sets everyone free. The morning headlines screamed across Chicago's newspapers. Maxwell Air cancels society wedding amid company scandal. And Maxwell Industries CEO steps down after father's suicide. The city was buzzing with gossip, but inside her apartment, Victoria was finally at peace. You're doing what? Her mother shrieked into the phone. I'm telling the whole story to Chicago Today magazine, Victoria said calmly, looking at the reporter sitting across from her. About Richard, about Jasmine, about everything. Have you lost your mind? Think about our reputation. That's all you've ever cared about, isn't it? Victoria's voice cracked. Well, I'm done caring about appearances. She hung up and turned to the reporter. Where should we start? From the beginning, the reporter said, turning on her recorder. Tell me about the day you first learned about Jasmine Washington. Meanwhile, at Maxwell Industries, the board of directors was in chaos. Richard sat quietly as they argued about the company's future. We need to distance ourselves from the scandal, one director insisted. Richard, you have to resign. No, Richard's voice cut through the noise. I'm not running away. We're going to face this head on. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every corrupt practice my father put in place. We're going to expose it all ourselves. You'll destroy the company. No, Richard stood up. We'll rebuild it. The right way this time. His phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine. Turn on Channel 5 now. The boardroom TV flickered to life, showing Victoria's interview. She was poised, elegant, and completely honest. Richard Maxwell didn't just cancel our wedding, she was saying. He chose truth over power, love over money, and I respect him for that. The reporter leaned forward. And what about Jasmine Washington? She's the woman he never stopped loving. Victoria smiled sadly. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit you're standing in the way of true love. In his art therapy class at Chicago Children's Hospital, Marcus watched Jasmine teach with tears in his eyes. She had no idea her story was playing on every TV in the city. Miss Jasmine, one of the young patients tugged at her paint-stained apron. Is it true you're going to marry a prince? Jasmine laughed. Where did you hear that? It's all over the TV, another child chimed in. About you and the rich man who never stopped loving you. Jasmine's hands froze on her paintbrush. Marcus, what are they talking about? He showed her his phone. Victoria's interview was trending everywhere. She's telling everyone the truth, Marcus said softly. About Richard's father, about your mother, about everything. Jasmine sank into a chair, overwhelmed. 20 years of secrets were spilling into the open, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her phone rang. James Chen. Have you seen the interview? He asked without preamble. James, I can't talk right now. Listen to me. His voice was urgent. Victoria's interview changes everything. The public sympathy is with you and Richard now. We can use this. I'm done using things, Jasmine said firmly. I'm done with revenge and games. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about justice. For your mother, for everyone Robert Maxwell hurt. Before she could respond, there was a commotion at the hospital entrance. Richard walked in, followed by a crowd of reporters. Mr. Maxwell, is it true you're giving up control of your company? Are you and Miss Washington getting back together? What about the wedding? Richard ignored them all, his eyes fixed on Jasmine. The children in her class watched with wide eyes as he walked straight to her. I just did something crazy, he said. What did you do? I signed over 51% of Maxwell Industries to a new charitable foundation, the Elaine Washington Foundation for Medical Care. Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth. Elaine Washington, her mother's name. The foundation will provide free medical care to families who can't afford it, Richard continued. No one will ever have to choose between love and health care again. The reporters were going wild, cameras flashing, but Richard and Jasmine might as well have been alone in the room. You named it after my mother. She brought us together once, Richard took her hands. Maybe she can help us do some good now. One of the young patients tugged at Richard's expensive suit. Are you the prince? Richard knelt down to the child's level. No, I'm just a man who made a lot of mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. Across town, James Chen watched the scene unfold on TV. His phone was ringing non-stop. Investors pulling out of his takeover plan, reporters asking for comments. He had lost, and for the first time in his life, losing felt right. Victoria was finishing her interview when her mother burst into the room. Stop this at once, she commanded. It's already done, Mother. Victoria stood up. And you know what? I feel free. Her mother sank into a chair, aging years in moments. What will people say? They'll say I was brave enough to tell the truth. Victoria turned to the reporter. One more thing, I'm starting my own foundation too, for women trapped in relationships they know are wrong. Back at the children's hospital, Jasmine's students had convinced Richard to paint with them. His Italian suit was splattered with colorful paint, but he was smiling more genuinely than he had in 20 years. You're good with them, Jasmine said softly. They're honest, Richard replied. No games, no pretense. Just pure truth. Like us once upon a time. Richard put down his paintbrush. We could be like that again if you want. It's not that simple. Why not? He gestured to the chaos around them. Paint-covered children, flashing cameras, the world turning upside down. Everything else in our lives is complicated. Why can't love be simple? Jasmine looked at the painting she had been working on, a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Because we're not the same people we were 20 years ago, she said. No, we're not. Richard touched her cheek. We're better. The wedding was 7 days away, and while there wouldn't be a ceremony, something far more meaningful was being built from the ashes of the past. Sometimes the best love stories don't end with a wedding. They end with the truth setting everyone free. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Jasmine's gallery as she packed up her office. After Richard's announcement about the foundation, donations had poured in. They needed a bigger space, more teachers, more everything. I still can't believe this is happening, Marcus said, carefully wrapping one of her paintings. From a small community art program to a full foundation? It's like a fairy tale. Life isn't a fairy tale, Jasmine replied, but she was smiling. Sometimes it's better. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Board meeting over. They accepted all our changes. The old guard is out. She was about to reply when James Chen walked in, looking different than she'd ever seen him. Humbled. I came to apologize, he said without preamble. I was so focused on destroying Richard, I forgot what really mattered. Jasmine put down the box she was holding. And what's that? Justice. Real justice, not revenge. He pulled out a check. I want to donate to the foundation, and, he hesitated, I want to help run it if you'll let me. Marcus watched them suspiciously from across the room, but Jasmine saw something genuine in James's eyes. Why? She asked. Because 20 years ago I watched my best friend lose everything because of his father's cruelty. I thought I was helping by plotting revenge, but all I did was carry on Robert Maxwell's legacy of hurt. He looked around the gallery. You and Richard, you're building something better. I want to be part of that. Before Jasmine could respond, Victoria walked in. The room tensed. Don't stop on my account, Victoria said, looking elegant even in casual clothes. I came to help pack. Jasmine exchanged confused looks with Marcus. You want to help? The foundation isn't just about medical care and art, is it? Victoria picked up a paintbrush. It's about healing. All kinds of healing. She turned to James. And you're right. It's time to build something better. Across town, Richard sat in his father's old office, now his office, looking at old family photos. Lisa knocked softly. The movers are here to clear out the rest of your father's things, she said. And they found something you should see. She handed him a small box. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed to him, all from Jasmine, all returned unopened. Your father intercepted them, Lisa explained. They were hidden in his private safe. Richard's hands shook as he opened the first letter. It was dated just days after Jasmine left. Dear Richard, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Your father gave me a choice I never wanted to make. But loving someone means protecting them, even from themselves. You used company money to help my mother. If that came out, you'd go to prison. I couldn't let that happen. I love you enough to walk away, Jasmine. Letter after letter, year after year, she had tried to explain. And his father had hidden them all. Get me a car, he told Lisa. I need to go to the gallery. But when he arrived, he found the gallery empty except for Victoria and James both helping to pack boxes. She's at the hospital, Victoria said, understanding his unasked question, meeting with the architects about the new foundation wing. Richard looked at James. His former best friend turned enemy, what now? I hear you want to help with the foundation, he said carefully. James nodded. If you'll let me. Why should I trust you? Because I'm done fighting. We all are. James gestured to Victoria. Ask her. Sometimes the best revenge is choosing to be better. Victoria stepped between them. He's right. And the foundation needs all the help it can get. Richard looked around the gallery, at the paintings that told the story of 20 years of love and loss. One caught his eye, a new one, still wet. It showed 3 hands joined together, different colors, different sizes, but united. Jasmine. They painted that this morning, Victoria said softly. She calls it healing together. Richard's phone rang, the hospital board. The new wing for the Elaine Washington Foundation needed his approval on some details, and they mentioned that Jasmine was in the meeting room, reviewing plans. Go, Victoria pushed him gently. James and I can handle things here. Are you sure? She smiled. I'm sure about a lot of things now, including that some love stories are worth waiting for. At Chicago General Hospital, Jasmine sat surrounded by blueprints and proposals. The small art therapy program she had started was growing into something she had never imagined possible. Miss Washington, her assistant poked her head in. Mr. Maxwell is here. Richard walked in holding a stack of old letters. Jasmine recognized her handwriting immediately. He kept them, she whispered. All this time. You never stopped trying. To tell me the truth, Richard's voice was hoarse. Even when I hated you, you tried to protect me. That's what love is, Jasmine said simply. Richard laid the letters on the table and pulled out a new envelope. I wrote this last night, about everything I should have said 20 years ago. But before he could hand it to her, the hospital CEO burst in. Richard, Jasmine, you need to see this. They followed him to the lobby, where a crowd had gathered. Around the TV, breaking news. James Chen had just announced a complete merger of his company with Maxwell Industries, with all profits going to the foundation. This is my way of making amends, James was saying on screen. Some might call it corporate suicide, but I call it corporate redemption. In the hospital lobby, Richard and Jasmine watched in amazement as their separate worlds merged into something entirely new. Did you know about this? Richard asked. No, Jasmine shook her head, but I'm learning that sometimes the best surprises come from letting go of old hurts. Richard took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. The wedding was 6 days away, and while the society pages mourned the cancellation of Chicago's biggest social event, something far more meaningful was taking its place. A foundation built on love, forgiveness, and the kind of truth that only comes after walking through fire together. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the ashes of what we thought we wanted, blooming into something we never dared to dream possible. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Plaza Hotel was filled with people, but not for the wedding that had been planned. Instead, it was the official launch of the Elaine Washington Foundation. The same flowers that were meant for Richard and Victoria's wedding now decorated the charity gala. Victoria stood at the podium, commanding attention in a simple blue dress. "Sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, not what we think we want," she said to the crowd. "This foundation was born from pain, but it will bring healing to thousands." In the audience, her mother sat rigid, still struggling to accept her daughter's new path. But when Victoria announced the creation of a women's empowerment program as part of the foundation, even she had to wipe away a tear. Jasmine watched from the side of the stage, remembering how different things had been just a week ago. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "The first round of art therapy applications is overwhelming. We need more teachers." "Already working on it," she texted back, smiling as she watched James Chen, talking with potential donors. He had transformed from ruthless businessman to passionate advocate overnight. "Your mother would be proud," a voice said behind her. Richard stood there, looking different from the polished CEO he'd been just days. His tie was slightly loose, his smile more genuine. "She always said everything happens for a reason," Jasmine replied. "I never believed her until now." The crowd applauded as Victoria finished her speech. She walked off stage and straight to Jasmine, hugging her tight. "Thank you," Victoria whispered. "For what?" "For showing me what real strength looks like." Their moment was interrupted by Lisa, rushing over with her tablet. "Richard, the hospital board is on the line. They've found irregularities in more of your father's old deals." Richard's face darkened. "More families he hurt?" "Yes, but..." Lisa hesitated. "There's something else. Some of the money he stole, he put it in trust funds. For any grandchildren you might have." Jasmine caught Richard's eye. Even in death, Robert Maxwell was trying to control his son's future. "Donate it all to the foundation," Richard said without hesitation. "Let his poison turn into medicine." Across the room, James was deep in conversation with Chicago's top medical administrators. "The merger means we can fund research into rare diseases," he was saying. "Cases like Mrs. Washington's won't go untreated anymore." The mention of her mother made Jasmine step away from the crowd. She found herself in the hotel garden, the same place where Richard's wedding was supposed to take place. "I thought I'd find you here," Richard said, following her out. "Too many people? Too many memories." She touched a white rose. "Did you know my mother loved roses? She used to say they were like people. Even the thorns had a purpose." Richard pulled out an old photograph from his wallet. "I found this in those letters my father hid. It's you and your mother, at her hospital bed. I'm in the background, trying to make her laugh." Jasmine took the photo with trembling hands. "I remember that day. She told me you were a good man, that your father wouldn't be able to change that." "She was wrong," Richard said softly. "I did change. I became exactly what he wanted. Cold, calculating, ready to hurt you for revenge. But you changed back," Jasmine touched his cheek. "You chose love over hate." Inside, the gala continued. Victoria was now talking with Jasmine's art students, who had been invited as special guests. One of them, a young girl with cancer, was showing Victoria her paintings. "Miss Jasmine taught me that art helps the medicine work better," the girl was saying. "And now Mr. Richard is making sure all kids can get both." Victoria knelt down to the girl's level. "Can I tell you a secret? Sometimes the best love stories aren't about princesses and weddings. Sometimes they're about people being brave enough to help others." James watched this interaction, a new understanding dawning on his face. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Cancel the real estate deal in New York," he told his assistant. "Use the money to build another art therapy wing. This time in Brooklyn. The night grew deeper and the gala began to wind down. Donors had pledged millions, hospitals had committed to partnering with the foundation, and lives were already being changed. In the garden, Richard and Jasmine sat on a bench, shoulders touching. "I found an old sketch in my father's things," Richard said. "You drew it in college. It shows two paths merging into one." "I remember," Jasmine smiled. "You said it looked like our futures coming together. Maybe it still does." Richard took her hand. Different paths, same destination. Their moment was interrupted by James and Victoria, both looking excited. "You need to see this," Victoria held up her phone. The local news was running a story about families coming forward, sharing how Robert Maxwell had hurt them over the years. "But look at the comments," James pointed. People weren't expressing hate or calling for revenge. Instead, they were asking how to donate to the foundation, how to help. "Your father wanted to build an empire through fear," Jasmine said to Richard. "Instead, his actions led to something beautiful being built through love." The hotel staff began cleaning up, but the four of them stayed in the garden, talking about plans for the foundation, for the future, for healing. The wedding would have been in 5 days, Victoria mused. But this is better than any wedding. The night wind carried the scent of roses, and somewhere, Jasmine thought, her mother was smiling. Because sometimes the thorns in our lives don't just have a purpose, they have the power to transform pain into purpose, hatred into healing, and broken dreams into beautiful new realities. The foundation was just beginning, but already it was changing lives. And in that garden under the stars, 4 people who had once been tangled in a web of revenge found themselves woven together in something far stronger, the tapestry of redemption. Morning light streamed through the windows of Chicago General Hospital's new art therapy wing. Jasmine stood in the doorway watching as workers hung a portrait of her mother in the main hall. Elaine Washington's warm smile would now greet every patient who came seeking help. "It's perfect," Richard said, standing beside her. "Just like her." "Almost perfect," Jasmine corrected, adjusting the frame slightly. Mom would have wanted it tilted just a bit to catch the light better. The past few days had been a whirlwind of activity. After the Foundation's launch gala, donations had poured in from across the country. Stories of Robert Maxwell's victims had sparked a movement of healing and hope rather than hatred. "Miss Washington," a nurse hurried up to them. "The first group of patients is here for the art therapy program." In the newly renovated room, children with various illnesses sat at colorful tables, their eyes wide with excitement. Their parents hung back worried and hopeful. "Art isn't just about making pretty pictures," Jasmine told them, handing out brushes. "It's about letting out all the feelings we can't put into words." As she moved among the tables, helping tiny hands hold brushes and mix colors, Richard watched from the doorway. This was what his father's money should have been doing all along. His phone buzzed. James Chen was calling. "You need to turn on the news," James said without greeting. "Your father's private records were just leaked online." Richard rushed to the nurse's station, where a TV was playing the morning news. His father's secret files revealed decades of manipulation, not just of business deals, but of people's lives. Sources say Robert Maxwell kept detailed records of every person he threatened, bribed, or destroyed, the reporter was saying. But in an unexpected twist, victims are being contacted by the Elaine Washington Foundation with offers of help. That was Victoria's doing. She had insisted on using the leaked information to find and help everyone Robert had hurt. Speaking of Victoria, she chose that moment to walk into the hospital, followed by a group of well-dressed women. "Ladies, this is what your donations will support," she was saying. "Real healing, both physical and emotional." The women were members of Chicago's elite social circle, the same people who would have been at Victoria's wedding. But instead of gossiping about fashion and scandals, they were here to help. "Victoria," Richard called out, "have you seen the news? About your father's files?" "Yes." She touched his arm gently. "But look around. His darkness is being turned into light." In the art therapy room, one of the children had started crying. Jasmine knelt beside her. "What's wrong, sweetie?" "I miss my mum," the little girl sobbed. "She has to work 2 jobs to pay for my medicine." Jasmine looked up to find Richard already on his phone. Lisa, get me information about. He mouthed the girl's name to Jasmine, who supplied it. About Sarah Martinez's family. The foundation needs to help them. James arrived at the hospital carrying a thick folder. I've been going through the merger details, he told Richard. Your father had shell companies we didn't know about. Millions hidden away. Use it for the foundation, Richard said without hesitation. Every cent. There's something else. James pulled out a letter. This was in his personal safe. It's addressed to you, dated the day he died. Richard took the letter with trembling hands. Finding a quiet corner, he read his father's last words. Son, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I told myself everything I did was to protect our family, our legacy. But the truth is I was protecting my own pride. I couldn't bear to see you choose a different path than the one I planned. I saw how you looked at Jasmine Washington. It was how I once looked at your mother, before money and power corrupted me. The day I threatened Jasmine, forced her to leave you, I killed something pure in both of us. The money I've hidden away. It was meant to control you even after I'm gone. But I realize now that you're stronger than I ever was. You'll build something better than my empire of lies. I'm sorry, son, for everything. Dad. Richard sat heavily in a chair. The letter crumpled in his fist. Jasmine found him there, his shoulders shaking. He knew, Richard whispered. He knew he was wrong, but he still couldn't stop himself. Jasmine took his hand. Sometimes people can see the right path, but don't have the strength to take it. Like us, 20 years ago. Richard looked up at her. We saw the right path but let fear and pride drive us apart. And now, before he could answer, they heard music coming from the art therapy room. Victoria had brought in a small string quartet to play for the children as they painted. The kids were creating a massive mural together, their medical equipment temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in color and creativity. Parents who had arrived stressed and worried were now smiling, some even picking up brushes themselves. Now we're building something my father never understood, Richard said, standing up. Real power isn't about control. It's about giving people the freedom to heal. James and Victoria joined them, all four watching the scene unfold. The hospital wing that was supposed to host wedding gifts was instead filled with art supplies and medical equipment, each item a step toward someone's healing. The wedding would have been in 4 days, Victoria mused. But look what we're celebrating instead. The quartet began playing a familiar tune, the song that was meant for Richard and Victoria's first dance. But instead of bringing pain, it now filled the hall with hope. A small boy tugged at Jasmine's sleeve. Miss Jasmine, I painted your mum, he said proudly, holding up a colorful abstract portrait. She's an angel now, helping people get better. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she hugged the child. Yes, she is, and she has a lot of helpers now. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, catching the portrait of Elaine Washington. Just right, making her smile seem to glow. Below it, children painted their fears and hopes. Parents found comfort in sharing their stories. And 4 people who had once been tangled in revenge discovered that the best healing happens when we help others heal. The wedding day was approaching, but no one was counting down anymore. They were too busy counting the lives they were changing, one brushstroke at a time. The day that was supposed to be Richard and Victoria's wedding dawned bright and clear over Chicago. But instead of wedding bells, the sound of children's laughter filled the garden of Chicago General Hospital's new Elaine Washington wing. Jasmine stood in the middle of the garden, helping young patients plant roses, her mother's favorite flower. Each child wore a name tag with 2 numbers, the days they'd been in treatment and the days they'd been doing art therapy. Miss Jasmine, called out little Sarah Martinez, the girl whose story had touched them all last week. Look, my rose is starting to bloom. Just like Sarah's family, dozens of others had been helped by the foundation. Her mother no longer worked 2 jobs. She was now employed as the foundation's family coordinator, helping other struggling parents navigate the healthcare system. Victoria arrived carrying boxes of art supplies. Her designer clothes were replaced by comfortable workwear, her engagement ring traded for paint-stained hands. The society pages are still talking, she told Jasmine with a laugh. They can't decide if I'm having a breakdown or a breakthrough. And what do you think? Jasmine asked, helping her unpack the supplies. "I think I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Victoria looked around at the children painting and planting. "This is better than any wedding." Inside the hospital, Richard was meeting with James Chen and the board of the newly merged companies. The merger that was meant to be a corporate takeover had transformed into something unprecedented in Chicago's business world. "The profits from last quarter," James was saying, "are enough to fund 3 more treatment centers across the country." Richard nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. In his pocket was the letter he had written to Jasmine 20 years ago, the one he never sent. Next to it was a new letter written last night. The board meeting ended, and Richard found himself walking to the garden. He stopped in the doorway, watching Jasmine teach a young boy how to mix colors. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Victoria said, appearing beside him. "I was a fool to ever want revenge," Richard admitted. "All it would have done is destroy something beautiful." "Then it's a good thing you chose love instead." Victoria squeezed his arm. "Go talk to her. It's time." In the garden, the children were creating a massive art installation. Painted flowers, intertwined with real ones, creating a stunning display of life and art merging together. "This reminds me of something," Jasmine said as Richard approached. "A sketch I drew in college. 2 paths. Merging into one," Richard finished. "I kept it all these years." He pulled out both letters from his pocket. "I want you to read something." Jasmine took the letters, noting the yellowed edges of one, the crisp newness of the other. The old letter. "Read, dear Jasmine, you left without a word, taking my heart with you. I don't understand why, but I promise I'll become someone worthy of your love. I'll build an empire, prove to everyone that I'm more than just my father's son. Then maybe you'll come back to me. Love, always, Richard." The new letter was simpler. "Dear Jasmine, 20 years ago, I thought power and money could win you back. I was wrong. Love isn't about proving anything. It's about building something together. Look at what we've created here. Not an empire of steel and glass, but a sanctuary of healing and hope. My father tried to keep us apart because he thought love made me weak. But he was wrong. Love made me strong enough to choose a different path, strong enough to turn pain into purpose. I'm not asking you to step back in time. We're different people now. But maybe we're better people. Maybe we had to lose each other to find out who we really are. I love you. Not the memory of you, but the amazing woman you've become. The artist who helps children heal. The daughter who honored her mother by creating something beautiful from loss. Whatever you decide, know that you've taught me the most important lesson. True power isn't about control or revenge. It's about having the courage to love without fear. Forever yours, Richard." Tears fell on the papers as Jasmine read. Around them, the garden bloomed with both painted and real flowers. Children laughed, and healing happened in ways medicine alone could never achieve. "The boy who wrote that first letter was lost," Richard said softly. "He thought he needed to prove something to be worthy of love." "And now," Jasmine asked, holding both letters to her heart, "now I know that love isn't about being worthy. It's about being real, being brave enough to build something together." From the hospital window, James and Victoria watched their friends finally find their way back to each other. "You know," James said, "when I planned to help Jasmine get revenge, I thought I was doing the right thing. But this is better." Victoria smiled. "Sometimes the best revenge is creating something beautiful." In the garden, Richard took Jasmine's hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I'm asking if we can build something together. Something even more amazing than what we've already created." Jasmine looked at the children painting, at the roses blooming, at the portrait of her mother smiling down from the hospital wall. "We already are," she said, and kissed him. The garden erupted in cheers and applause. The children, the parents, the hospital staff, everyone had become part of this story of healing and love. Later that evening, as the sun set over Chicago, 4 friends sat in the garden. Victoria and James had brought champagne to toast not to a wedding, but a new beginning. "To the power of love," Victoria raised her glass. "To healing," James added. "To second chances," Richard smiled at Jasmine. "To mother's roses," Jasmine finished, looking at The garden where painted and real flowers bloomed together, just like love and healing past and present, pain and joy. The wedding day had come and gone, but something far more precious had taken its place. In a garden filled with art and roses, surrounded by lives being healed and hearts being mended, they had all found something better than revenge. They had found redemption. And somewhere, Elaine Washington was surely smiling, knowing that love had finally found its true power, not in grand gestures or revenge, but in the simple act of choosing to heal instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of hate. The story that began with a wedding invitation sent in, Spite had ended with love winning not through power or revenge, but through the quiet strength of healing hearts and blooming roses. Sometimes the most beautiful endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that grow naturally from the seeds of forgiveness, watered by tears of both joy and sorrow, and blooming in the garden of second chances.